My best friend set me up on a blind date with a girl as joke, but it turns out she is the smartest person in the room. What he did not think about, what none of them thought about, was what happens when the person you underestimate is quietly the smartest, sharpest, most composed human being in the entire room. I should tell you early, without turning this into something cheap, that it was not only words and pride at a dinner table. There was attraction. There was closeness. There was the kind of private tension that shows up in glances and timing and the space between two people when the room finally stops watching. I am not going to narrate every second of that like a script. I will give you what mattered, and let your imagination do whatever it is going to do with the rest. My best friend Ryan thought he was being funny. He was not. But before I tell you what actually happened that night, I need you to understand something. And not in the way Ryan planned. Because the woman he chose to make the punchline of his little setup turned out to be the kind of person who walks into a rigged room and somehow makes everyone in it reveal exactly who they are. Including me. Let me take you back to the exact moment my life quietly stopped going in the direction I thought it was headed. Because nothing about what happened that night looked like a beginning. It looked like a bad joke. And for a while it was. My name is James Calloway. I'm 36 years old, and somewhere between my early 30s and now, being single stopped being a personal choice and became a community concern. My sister sent me dating profiles with color-coded notes in the margins. My coworkers had a running group chat I was not supposed to know about. And Ryan, my best friend since we were 17 years old sharing a broken car and bad ideas, had delivered the same speech about getting back out there so many times I could perform it word for word in his exact voice, including the part where he paused for dramatic effect before saying, "You deserve to be happy, man." I knew he meant well. That was the thing. The people who make your life the hardest to live are usually the ones who love you the most and have absolutely no idea what they are doing. I had been off the dating scene for about a year at that point. Not because something dramatic happened. Not because I was nursing a wound so deep I couldn't function. But because the relationship I had walked away from with a woman named Claire had been the quiet kind of painful. The kind that doesn't leave a scar you can point to. We had been together for 3 years. We cared about each other genuinely and completely, and we still somehow managed to want entirely different lives. No cheating, no blowout fight, no single moment where everything collapsed. Just two people slowly realizing they were building toward different futures, and deciding to stop pretending that was fine. When it ended, we were both sad and both relieved, and that combination is one of the loneliest feelings a person can carry. After Claire, I stopped forcing it. I stopped going on dates that felt like job interviews. I stopped letting Ryan set me up with his wife Dana's friends. I cooked dinner at home. I read things I had been putting off for years. I started running in the mornings, not to clear my head the way people say in movies, just because I liked having somewhere to be at 6 in the morning when the city was still quiet and nothing required anything from me. I was, for the first time in a long time, at peace. Then Ryan called on a Thursday night while I was halfway through a bowl of pasta and a documentary about deep-sea fish. Casual dinner Saturday, he said. Small group. People you know, couple you don't. No pressure, no agenda. Just food and good company. You've been hiding, James. It's becoming a thing. I told him I hadn't been hiding. I had been living. He said those weren't mutually exclusive, which was surprisingly philosophical for a man who had once argued seriously that cereal counted as a meal. I said fine. One dinner. And I meant it to be nothing. I want you to remember that because it matters. I walked into that evening expecting absolutely nothing. And that detail will become important very soon. The restaurant Ryan picked was called Alcott, one of those places in the city that had been written about in magazines nobody actually subscribed to anymore. Exposed brick, Edison bulbs, cocktails named after obscure jazz musicians, and a menu that described mashed potatoes using 4 adjectives. The kind of place people chose when they wanted the setting to signal that the night was significant before anyone had to commit to saying so. I arrived 7 minutes late because parking in that neighborhood required a level of optimism I did not have. I walked in, gave my name, and was led to a long table near the back window where the city lights sat outside like they had dressed up for the occasion. Ryan was already there, with Dana. So were 2 other couples I recognized from various birthdays and barbecues. And there was one empty chair, right next to a woman I had never seen before in my life. Something in the room shifted the moment I stepped toward the table. It was subtle. The kind of shift you feel before you understand it. Dana looked up and smiled a little too wide. One of the other guys, Derek, leaned back in his chair with the ease of a man who had been waiting for something interesting to happen. Ryan stood up the way people stand when they think they are about to be congratulated. And then I understood. This was not a casual dinner. This was a setup. The woman beside the empty chair looked up at me in that same moment. She had dark eyes that caught the low light in a way that made you want to say something worth hearing. Natural curls pulled back loosely. A green wrap dress that looked effortless in the way that actually takes thought. She was plus size, yes, but I want to be honest with you about something. That was not what I noticed first. What I noticed first, before anything else, was how completely still she was. Not frozen. Not nervous. Still. The way a person is still when they have already assessed the room, understood exactly what is happening, and quietly decided not to give anyone the satisfaction of watching them react. That kind of stillness is not something you are born with. It is something you earn. Ryan said, "James, there he is," with the enthusiasm of a man presenting evidence of his own good judgment. "This is Sophie. Sophie Navarro. Sophie, this is James." Sophie smiled. Politely, carefully. The kind of smile that offers just enough warmth to be civil while giving away absolutely nothing. I said hi. She said hi. And then Ryan, because he could not help himself, added, "We thought you two might hit it off." The table went quiet in that particular way tables go quiet when everyone is pretending they were not just listening. I looked at Ryan for one long second. He had the grace to look slightly uncomfortable, which was the least he deserved. Then I pulled out the chair and sat down. "Good," I said, because I was hoping there would be at least one person here I had never been forced to hear tell the same 3 stories. Sophie turned to look at me. Not a glance. A real look. Like she was recalibrating something. One corner of her mouth moved. Ryan blinked. "Wow. Starting aggressive. You invited me to a surprise dinner with an audience," I said. "Aggressive feels appropriate." That got some laughs. Nervous ones. Good. Sophie picked up her water glass and said, "For the record, I was also told this was a normal dinner." I turned toward her. So we were both lied to. Apparently. Strong foundation. Her smile came through then. Small, sharp, and real. Not the polite one from before. Something else entirely. And that was the moment, if I am being completely honest with myself, that the evening stopped being something I was tolerating and became something I was actually present for. We talked. I know that sounds ordinary. 2 people at a dinner table talking. But there is a specific kind of talking that happens when 2 people have both decided, separately and without discussing it, to stop performing for the room and just be actual humans with each other. That was what happened. Sophie worked as a high school art teacher. She had once accidentally ordered 70 pounds of clay instead of 7 because the supplier's website had been, in her words, clearly designed by someone who had never used the internet. She loved used bookstores, had strong opinions about cilantro that I will not repeat here out of respect for people on both sides of that debate, and had a theory she delivered with complete seriousness that every bad first date could be identified by watching how a man treated the waiter within the first 10 minutes. I told her that seemed harsh. She said it was generous. She used to give them 20 minutes. I laughed. Not politely. Actually laughed. The kind that comes up from somewhere real and doesn't ask permission first. And across the table, I caught Ryan watching us with an expression I had never seen on his face before. Something between surprise and the slow, dawning discomfort of a man who had expected one outcome and was getting something else entirely. He had set this up expecting awkward. He had expected me to be uncomfortable or worse, to play along with something unkind for the sake of the room. Neither of those things were happening. And the night was still very young. Because here is what nobody at that table could have predicted, least of all me. The most dangerous moment was still coming. And it would not come from Ryan. It would come from Derek. And when it did, every single person at that table would find out exactly who I was, in about 30 seconds flat. Ryan thought he was setting up a joke. What he actually set up was the moment my entire life quietly turned a corner. And it started with a single question from Derek that made the whole table go still. By the time the main course arrived, the table had mostly given up pretending they were not watching us. Dana kept refilling her wine glass slightly too often. The couple to Ryan's left, whose names I kept forgetting and replacing with descriptive labels in my head, were having a conversation that kept dying every time Sophie or I said something. And Derek, who was the kind of man who mistook loudness for charm and familiarity for friendship, had been watching our end of the table with the patient energy of someone waiting for the right moment to say something he had already decided to say. That moment came between the salad and the entree. He leaned back in his chair, spread his arms slightly the way men do when they want to take up more space than they need, and looked directly at me with a grin that had too much teeth in it. "So James," he said, loud enough for the full table to hear, "be honest. Is Sophie your usual type? I want to stop here for a second, because I need you to understand what that question actually was. It was not curiosity. It was not friendliness. It was an invitation. An invitation for me to either confirm something cruel by stumbling or deflect in a way that left Sophie quietly humiliated. It was the kind of question that turns a person into a topic. And everyone at that table knew it, including Sophie, whose fingers I could see tighten just slightly around the stem of her fork. That fork mattered. That small, quiet, controlled movement told me everything about how many times she had been in a version of this moment before. How many times she had sat in a room and felt the air shift like that and had to decide, again, how much of herself to spend on people who were not worth it. I set my drink down. Slowly, I looked at Derek, and I said no. The table went completely still. Sophie looked down, and before that silence could become the kind that swallows people whole, I finished the sentence. She is sharper, warmer, and more genuinely interesting than most people I have been lucky enough to sit next to. I turned slightly towards Sophie then, not performing it, not making it theatrical, just making sure she could hear me clearly. So if you are asking whether I usually get set up with someone this worth knowing, the answer is no. Nobody moved. Derek's grin didn't disappear all at once. Kind of dissolved. The way ice does when you leave it somewhere it does. Not belong. Ryan's wife looked into her glass. Sophie lifted her eyes to mine. And for just a moment, one single quiet moment, the entire restaurant seemed to fall away and it was just the two of us on either side of a sentence that had said something true. Then I looked back at Derek. If you were asking something else, I said, don't. That was it. No raised voice, no long speech, no dramatic pause for effect. Just a door, firmly closed. The table did not recover from that the way people recover from minor awkwardness. It sat in it. Ryan cleared his throat. Dana found something fascinating about her bread plate. The couple whose names I still couldn't remember suddenly became very interested in the menu. Sophie was quiet for a moment. Then she said, well, that was unexpected. I picked up my menu. Good unexpected, or we should find the nearest exit unexpected. She leaned forward just slightly. Ask me again after dessert. And for the first time all evening, I genuinely forgot the room was watching. The rest of the dinner moved differently after that. The table had lost its appetite for cruelty and replaced it with a performance of normalcy that nobody quite pulled off. Conversations picked up but stayed shallow. Derek made two jokes that landed to silence. Ryan kept starting sentences and not finishing them. And Sophie and I talked like none of it was happening. She told me about a student who only drew dragons but made them emotionally specific, each one clearly processing something the kid couldn't say out loud. She told me about a senior who painted a portrait of her grandmother from memory and made the whole class go quiet in the way only real art can. She told me about a freshman who hid tiny cartoon frogs in every assignment like a private signature. I told her about the 80-year-old regular at our downtown branch who had single-handedly collapsed our inventory projections 3 times by recommending the same mystery novel to half the neighborhood. She said that sounded like the most power one person had ever accidentally wielded. I said I had considered putting her photo on a wall. Sophie laughed, and the sound of it was warm and unhurried. The kind of laugh that doesn't perform itself. The kind that just happens. When the waiter came to take dessert orders, she ordered chocolate cake and 2 forks without asking me. I looked at her. Bold assumption. You defended my dignity in front of an audience, she said. You have earned shared cake privileges. Is that the official system? It is now. The cake arrived, and for a stretch of time the evening was almost normal. Better than normal, actually. There was something easy about talking to her. Not comfortable in the way that means boring. Easy in the way that means neither of us was translating ourselves for the other person's benefit. But underneath it, I could feel something she was holding, carefully, quietly, the way people carry things they have carried so many times they've gotten efficient at it. That something came out after dinner. People started gathering coats and doing the math on the bill with the focus of people who needed something to do with their hands. Sophie slipped her bag over her shoulder and said she was going to get some air. I gave Ryan a look that communicated, clearly, that our conversation was not finished. Then I followed her outside 2 minutes later. She was standing under the restaurant awning, arms folded loosely, city light in her hair, looking at the street with the expression of someone who had been doing this a very long time and was tired, but not defeated. I stopped beside her. "You okay?" She smiled without turning toward me. "That question has been very popular tonight." "That is not an answer." "No." She looked at the pavement. "I am okay. I am also exhausted from being okay in rooms that expect me not to be." There was a full history inside that sentence and I did not rush through it. She glanced at me. I knew what tonight was about 5 minutes after I sat down. Maybe before. I almost left. "Why didn't you?" She looked at me then. Really looked. "Because you walked in." Something in my chest went tight. Not because it was romantic. Because it was trust. Given before I had done nearly enough to deserve it. She continued. "I told myself if he looks disappointed when he sees me, I will excuse myself, go home, and delete 3 phone numbers before midnight. And if I didn't look disappointed, then maybe dinner would be worth staying for." I asked, "Was it?" She was quiet for one long moment. "It became worth staying for." The door behind us opened. Ryan stepped out with his hands in his jacket pockets, wearing the expression of a man who needed to apologize and was hoping proximity would count as a start. "Emma," he started, and I corrected him without thinking. "Sophie," I said. He looked at me. "Right. Sophie. Can I talk to you both for a second?" Sophie looked between us. "I can give you space." "No," I said. "You can stay." Ryan rubbed the back of his neck. "Look, I didn't mean for anything to get uncomfortable. I genuinely thought you two might be good together." "That part might be true," I said. "The problem is you invited us like people and watched us like entertainment." He looked at the ground. Brad was out of line. Yes. And everyone who sat there waiting to see what would happen was right there with him. He didn't have an answer for that. Sophie did. She stepped forward slightly and said, "I don't need anyone punished. I just need fewer people confusing cruelty with a good time." Ryan looked properly ashamed then. The real kind, not the kind that wants credit for feeling bad. "I'm sorry," he said. Sophie nodded once. Accepted. Not erased. 3 words that said more about who she was than anything else I had seen that night. Ryan went back inside. The door closed, and for a moment, neither of us said anything. Then Sophie looked at me and said she'd had a speech prepared. "For the table? For all of them," she said. "It was thorough. Possibly too long. What happened to it?" She smiled. "You ruined it." I told her I wasn't sorry. She said she already knew. Light rain started falling then. The soft kind. The kind that doesn't ask you to go inside. Sophie looked up at it, then back at me. "Good unexpected," she said. "Or kitchen exit unexpected." I looked at her properly. Good unexpected. Her smile came slowly. Warm this time. The real one. "Then ask me out without an audience," she said quietly. And I did. Not for that night. She said tonight was contaminated. She wanted to know what this felt like without witnesses, in ordinary daylight, when no one was watching to see if the joke landed. "Saturday," I said. "Bookstore first," she said immediately. "Then coffee. If you take me somewhere generic, I will lose all respect for you and I will be very calm about it. Which will be worse." I looked at her. "Those are extremely specific terms." She smiled. "Those are standards." I said bookstore Saturday, then coffee. "Good," she said. Car pulled up. Hers. Before she got in, she turned back. "James." "Yeah." "Thank you for what you said in there. You don't have to thank me for not being unkind." "No," she said. "But I can thank you for being exact." Then she got in the car and left me standing under the awning with light rain on my jacket and the very clear sense that Ryan had, entirely by accident, done one genuinely useful thing. Saturday came and went in the best possible way. Sophie met me outside the bookstore on Clement Street wearing paint-stained canvas sneakers, an oversized brown cardigan, and the quiet confidence of someone who had stopped dressing for other people's comfort a long time ago. No performance, no trying too hard. Just herself, standing on the sidewalk, already scanning the window display before I even said hello. Before we go in, she said, I judge people by which section they drift toward first. I said that seemed like a lot of pressure for 11 in the morning. She said she had been doing it for years and it had never failed her. We spent nearly 2 hours inside. Sophie pulled books off shelves and explained which covers were lying to the reader and why. I showed her the handwritten staff recommendation cards and told her about a retired librarian named Marguerite who had single-handedly derailed our ordering system 3 separate times by personally recommending the same novel to half the neighborhood. Sophie found this so funny she had to put down the book she was holding. We each picked something for the other. She chose a poetry collection for me. I chose a cookbook for her. Neither of us bought what we had originally come in thinking we wanted. That felt significant. Coffee afterward was at a small place around the corner with mismatched chairs and a window seat that made people accidentally honest. Sophie ordered something with oat milk and too much cinnamon. I got an Americano. We sat across from each other and the conversation moved through 5 different topics without once feeling like we were trying. Then halfway through her cup she set it down and said, Can I ask you something uncomfortable? Given everything, I said, I think we cleared that threshold already. She smiled. Then she got serious. Did you feel like you had to defend me at dinner? I could have answered quickly. I didn't. No, I said. I felt like Derek tried to make you the ending of a joke I had not agreed to participate in. She held my gaze. If I had handled it myself, I would have thoroughly enjoyed watching him suffer. That landed. She laughed, bright and real, the kind that pulled a glance from the table behind us. Then she looked down at her cup and her voice got quieter. I am used to people making decisions about me before I have opened my mouth. She looked up. So when you looked at me like I was simply the person sitting next to you, that was not small. You were, I said. Exactly that. Something shifted in her expression then. Soft and certain. The date did not end after coffee. Turned into a walk through the art supply store 3 blocks down where she bought new brushes and made me guess the purpose of each one. I failed at all of them with complete confidence. She respected the confidence even while correcting every single answer. By late afternoon, we were outside her building. Neither of us had a good reason to keep extending the day, except the obvious one, and neither of us wanted to say the obvious one out loud yet. She held the bookstore bag at her side. Good unexpected? She asked. Better than good, I said. Her phone buzzed. She glanced at it and something moved across her face. Not fear. Something closer to fatigue. She turned the screen toward me. It was a text from Dana, Ryan's wife. Heard you two are actually seeing each other. Guess the setup worked after all. Sophie stared at it for a moment. Then she looked at me. I really don't want them thinking they built this. They didn't, I said. They made a bad room. You made everything worth staying for. The expression that crossed her face was the softest thing I had seen from her yet. She put the phone in her pocket. Come upstairs, James, she said quietly. I'm not ready for this to be over yet. I went upstairs. That sounds calmer than it felt. Sophie's apartment was warm and lived in and full of things that made immediate sense once you knew her. Student artwork in frames along one wall. Sketchbooks stacked on the coffee table. A ceramic bowl of wrapped candies by the door. Plants in every window, some thriving, some operating entirely on hope and indirect light. She made chamomile for herself and ginger tea for me, carried both mugs to the couch and said, I should warn you my tea collection suggests I am more emotionally organized than I actually am. I said I would try not to be misled. She sat down cross-legged and wrapped both hands around her mug. For a while we talked about nothing important. Bad apartment plumbing. The specific smell of old bookstores and why no one had bottled it successfully yet. Whether adults should be allowed to own more than 2 decorative blankets without a formal justification. It was easy in the way that only happens when 2 people are not performing anything for each other. Then she got quiet. I waited. The thing about being turned into a joke, she said slowly, is that people always expect you to be grateful when someone stops the joke. Like that should be enough. Like that cancels it. You shouldn't have to be grateful for basic decency, I said. Her eyes came up to mine. Yes, exactly. I liked what you did, she continued. I did. But what I liked even more was that you didn't treat me like something breakable afterward. You threatened to judge my bookstore on a grading scale, I said. You didn't need protecting. She smiled. You needed the pressure. I performed well. You did. The quiet after that was full rather than empty. Sophie set her mug on the coffee table and looked at me. James. Yeah. I am not asking for a speech. I am not looking for reassurance. I just want the truth. She looked at me directly. Did tonight change how you see me? Yes, I said. Her expression shifted slightly. And before that shift could settle into the wrong shape, I finished. It made me see you more clearly. I already thought you were beautiful. But tonight I saw the way you hold your ground without turning cold. The way you accept an apology without erasing what made it necessary. The way you can be in a hard room and still somehow be the most honest person in it. I leaned slightly forward. That changed how I saw you. It made me want to know you properly. Over time. Without an audience. Sophie's eyes went bright. She smiled through it. That, she said very quietly, was dangerously precise. Someone told me precision matters. It does. Then she kissed me. Not because the night had been hard and I was convenient comfort. Not because the table had wounded her and she needed somewhere soft to land. Felt like a decision. Unhurried and entirely hers. When we pulled apart, she laughed softly and touched her forehead to mine for just a moment. I was trying to wait until the second date for that, she said. How did that plan go? Terribly. I said, I'm honored. She said, you should be. 3 days later was the second date. Small Italian place with extra bread and no agenda. Sophie drew tiny cartoon frogs on the paper napkin while telling me about a student who had finally submitted a painting after months of insisting he was not an art person. After dinner, we walked for nearly an hour. She reached for my hand first. I noticed. I didn't say anything about it, but I noticed, and it mattered more than I would have admitted out loud at the time. Ryan apologized properly about 2 weeks later. Not by text. In person. He came to my office looking uncomfortable in the way people look when they know an apology is overdue and cannot hide from it anymore. He said he thought he was being funny and that he hadn't thought about what it actually meant for Sophie to be in that room. I told him to tell her that directly. He did. Sophie received it the way she received everything that required grace. Accepted. Not erased. 6 months in, I went to her school's spring art show. I stood in the gymnasium and watched her move from painting to painting while students pulled at her sleeve, each of them needing her to see what they had made. She looked completely at home. Not because the setting was impressive, because she was exactly where she was supposed to be. One of her students, a quiet girl with purple-framed glasses, pulled me aside and whispered, "Are you Miss Navarro's boyfriend?" I looked across the room at Sophie, who was crouching down to look closely at a small painting of a bird that had been made with more feeling than technique, and smiling at it like it was a masterpiece. I said, "I am trying very hard to earn that." The girl nodded like that was the right answer. Sophie looked over at me from across the room then. She had heard. She shook her head slowly, still smiling, and turned back to the painting. A year after that dinner, we moved in together. She brought too many plants and I brought too many books, and we solved it by buying more shelving and agreeing never to discuss whether that actually solved anything. 2 years after that, I proposed to her in the bookstore on Clement Street. No crowd. No microphone. No grand gesture with strangers watching on their phones. Just Sophie in the poetry section holding a collection she had not planned to buy, turning around to find me already certain. I told her I did not want to be the man who stood up for her one evening at a dinner that was designed to be unkind. I wanted to be the man who chose her every ordinary Tuesday, every quiet morning, every moment that didn't have an audience and didn't need one. She cried. Then she laughed. Then she said yes and immediately accused me of using the bookstore against her. She was completely right. I had absolutely done that on purpose. When people ask us how we met, Sophie smiles and says some friends set us up as a joke. I always add the same line. Lucky for us, they had no idea who they were dealing with. Ryan thought he was being funny the night he set us up. He thought he was creating a moment people would laugh about later. He thought he was giving the table something entertaining to watch. What he actually did, without meaning to, without knowing it, was put two people in the same room who were both done pretending to be smaller than they were. And that room, as bad as it was, became the reason for everything that came after. If you made it this far, I want to hear from you. Drop a comment below and tell me where in the world you are listening to this story from. It genuinely surprises me every time I see how far these stories travel. And if this one stayed with you, hit subscribe because there are more stories exactly like this one coming. The kind that start in the worst possible moment and end somewhere you never saw coming. Leave a like if you think Ryan still owes us both dinner. And tell me in the comments, has anyone ever underestimated you before they knew a single thing about you? What happened next?